I think they were invincible and deserve to be called that.
Where do you think the Invincibles stand in the history of New Zealand rugby, in the history of the All Blacks over time?
I think they stand right up there, to be perfectly honest. I mean, to go on one of those major tours and not lose one single game, be away for as long as they were, beat all the opposition that was thrown in front of them, bearing in mind, of course, that Scotland didn't want to play them, they stand right up there. They have to. I can't think of any other tour where an All Black team has gone away for so long and been unbeaten.
And 32 games, 6 months tour, 2 months in a boat. I mean, you'd have to be just as mentally strong, right, to cope with that kind of rigor?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what would you do on a boat that would keep some sort of match fitness up? I mean, you can run around the deck and all the rest of it, but, you know, match fitness is something entirely different. I mean, where do you get the body contact and that sort of thing? So you arrive in Britain and you haven't had any sort of rugby for months and months and months. Then you embark on this massive tour and you're not beaten at any point.
And in the team, I understand before they left New Zealand, they're actually largely written off by the public, by former players. I mean, that must have been a great motivating factor for the tour as well.
Yeah, it would have been, absolutely. I mean, of course, we hadn't had a tour of that magnitude since '05, and there were a few scores to settle, I think, but 19 years on, and you're right, there was a lot of scepticism around about whether they were any good or not. I don't know quite why that would be the case, because when you look at some of the personnel in that team, I mean, we weren't to know at that point how good George Nepia was. He was only 19 years of age, but there were some legendary players, guys like Mark Nichols, Bert Cook, the Brownlee brothers, Cliff Porter, who was the captain, but didn't play a lot of games because of injury. I mean, there were some very, very good players. So I'm not quite sure why they left these shores and people were just a little sceptical about how good they were going to be.
Some absolutely legendary names. And talk about George Nepia. I mean, he was effectively our first superstar of rugby, wasn't he?
He was, yep. 19 years of age and played in every single game on the tour. That is unbelievable. I mean, if we sent a team away today on a tour, you wouldn't expect them to play. May play once a week, because on tours, of course, you play twice a week, but to play in every single game and be able to play in every single game. I mean, injuries must have come into the calculations, as they did with Cliff Porter, the captain. But here was a 19-year-old who, in his entire career, we talk about him being legendary, in his entire career, and he played 9 test matches. But he played every single game on a 32-match tour, including all 4 test matches. Quite remarkable, really.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the game against Wales, of course, can you talk to us a bit about that and the payback for 1905?
Well, we all know 1905 was very controversial. In 1905, of course, there was the Dean's try, which wasn't awarded, and of course all the All Blacks on the day said that Dean's actually placed the ball over the line. The referee was so far behind that by the time he arrived, Dean's had been pulled back off the line by one of the Welsh players and appeared to be short of the line. So there was that enormous controversy. And we had to wait 19 years for retribution, I suppose you could call it. And so they played Wales. They didn't win by a lot. They did win by a lot, because 19-0, I guess even today 19-0. But ironically, 19 years had lapsed from '05 to 24. And for every single point they scored, it was 1 year anniversary, if you like, to 1905. So it meant a lot, no doubt, to the players. And Wales, of course, in those days, things have changed a bit. I mean, we've beaten Wales every time since 1953 now, and that seems an awful long time ago. That's a lifetime. But in those days, Wales were a major force in world rugby, quite clearly. And so to beat them in Cardiff was a really big deal.
So that was a huge win, and the other big win, I mean, they're all big wins, but of course the final test of the tour against England, that was really the big challenge, wasn't it?
Yep, it was, and England were a major force in world rugby in those days as well. And when you look at the scoreline, I think it was 17-8. That's quite a high score in those days, and they were coming to the end of the tour at that point. They knew they were unbeaten quite clearly, and they didn't want to falter at Twickenham, and they were just too good. But the other thing that really was significant in that particular game was that they had to play with 14 for quite some time, because Cyril Brownlee became the first ever All Black to be sent off in a test match. It's kind of a lot easier to get sent off these days, but back in those days it was pretty hard. You had to do something pretty dire to do that. And I'm not sure he did anything dire, but he did get his marching orders. And so not only did they win the test against England, but they had to play a significant time with only 14 men.
And of course, after Cyril, we're talking about sending off, we had to wait until Colin Meads and then, of course, Sonny Bill. So 3 pretty big names to be the first ones to be sent off.
Yes, exactly. You know, when Sonny Bill got sent off in the British Isles test here in, I think, 2017, he became the 3rd player. But since that time, I think we've added about another 7 or 8. Which shows that it's a bit easier to get sent off these days.
Yeah, how much the game's changed. Hey, do you know much about the kind of reception that the team received when they arrived back in New Zealand at all? Or?
I believe they had ticker-tape parades, etc., etc. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, they went to France and played 4 games over there, and I think they might have also gone to Canada. So it was a long time between their last game till the time they arrived back in New Zealand, something like 6 weeks. And if that happened today, you would almost have forgotten what had happened. But people turned out. I mean, the All Blacks, as they are today, were iconic at the time, and people would have followed the tour. They would have been aware that they'd been away for so long, aware that they were unbeaten, and they turned out in their numbers.
Brilliant. And 100 years on from the team, 100-year anniversary this year, what do you think the lasting legacy is of that Invincibles team?
Well, they weren't called the Invincibles for nothing. I mean, I think that was a great. It was a great summary of the way they played. They played, as New Zealand teams have done through the years. They played a pleasing brand of rugby. The idea has always been for the All Blacks is to score tries because that's the most points you can get in one particular movement, or it is now. It never used to be when drop kicks were worth 4 points, but. New Zealanders have always had a great attitude to rugby that the way to score points and to beat the opposition is to score tries, and that's what the 24 team did. They took on all comers, all available teams. Scotland didn't want to play them, so they just had to grin and bear that one. They went to France, they won there as well. I think they were invincible and deserve to be called that.